Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kiara Simmons-Wood, and I'm the Events Planning and Marketing Coordinator at Charity Digital. I'm going to be your host for today's session and would like to give you all a very warm welcome. So today's session on how to generate ethical and high-quality AI content is led by Lisa, Charity Digital's very own Head of Partnerships, who you can currently see a picture of on the screen. And in this webinar, we are going to cover the ethics of generative AI and show charities how to mitigate the risks of introduced bias and copyright issues. Now, just before handing over to Lisa, I just want to share a few house rules and pointers for today's session. So the session is currently being recorded and will be uploaded to watch on demand within a week's time. The slides and other resources will also be made available to you by the end of the day. Closed captions are also available, and I will shortly share in the chat how to enable these. During the webinar, please feel free to ask loads of questions in the Q&A section for Lisa to address at the end of her presentation. And feel free to share any other comments, experiences, or top tips in the chat section. And if there's a particular question in the Q&A section that you would like answered first, you can also upvote questions. Finally, if you encounter any sound or image issues, please let me know in the chat and I'll do my very best to get the session back to normal as soon as I can. Without further ado, let me hand over to Lisa.
Well, thank you very much, Kiara, and welcome everybody to today's session. As Kiara said, I'm Lisa Shamet. I'm the Head of Partnerships at Charity Digital. Maybe some of you who are regular and have attended the Digital Fundraising Summit earlier last month may have seen me hosting a panel which was also talking about AI with our friends at Salesforce. So today we're going to focus more on how to generate ethical and high quality AI content. And this basically this presentation has been put together with the help of our fabulous content team and using quite a few resources from our friends at Salesforce as well. And as you can obviously imagine, generative artificial intelligence has been the tech talk point of 2023. And without questions, the one for 2024. People are turning to ChatGPT, Bard, Scribe, and a million other competing platforms to create their content. There's a small problem, though. A lot of that content is not particularly good, or worse, the outputs can sometimes be inaccurate, outdated, or even unethical. And sometimes we're seeing minimal thought awarded to the accuracy and veracity of outputs, ethical issues in terms of copyright and plagiarism, or even the basic quality of the content produced. So with all that in mind, we want to show how to use AI responsibly, because it is great, but obviously we just need to be a little bit more careful. So we'll go quickly over, introduction to generative AI, what are its effect on content creation, and how we can go about producing ethical, accurate, and high quality generative AI content. So first of all, what is generative AI? We use AI every day, as most of you probably know. Sometimes we don't even know it, but things like Google Maps, search engines, email marketing, and predictive text in messages, Netflix and Meta algorithm, all of them are relying on some sort of artificial intelligence. The tech has led to huge benefits. And basically what is going to be interesting to us is the generative AI, because we've been doing predictive AI for a long time. Predictive AI focuses on predicting specific outcomes or events based on existing data. So we use historical data to identify patterns and trends, which are then used to make prediction. Generative AI, on the other hand, depends on, fast processing and intelligent algorithm, and it's married with a huge amount of data to produce results based on specific prompts. So the tech learns, automatically, and it uses that information to improve processing and produce better results. So it's focused on creating new content or data that is not explicitly derived from existing data. And obviously, it's revolutionizing everyday work. It can allow you to save time and be faster, also cutting costs and reduce errors, streamlining processes or improve operation, helping your teams work more efficiently so that, AI can help them, outsource this mundane task and they can focus on more intense and complex tasks. It's also very useful for analyzing and reporting on data, doing some research and due diligence, discovering trends and insight, even brainstorming. As shown in the Skill Up on AI Salesforce report on their blog, AI means enhancing, not replacing human workforce. So obviously, as we've seen, generative AI is already reducing workload, and some reports from Accenture say that it will reduce workload by about 60 to 70% over the next few years. And in our world, which is the charity world and non-profit, the most recent Charity Digital Skills report says that 78% of charities surveyed have been stating that AI is relevant to their work, but 73% are not feeling prepared enough to respond to the opportunities and challenges it poses. So obviously, generative AI has a myriad of applications, and that as you probably can recognize some of the images there, but you can use it to generate text like ChatGPT and Jasper. You can use it to generate images like Deep AI and DALL-E #2, audio like Soundro or Jukebox, and video like Pictory, and way much more. Yeah, so many different AI platforms that there's a very interesting website that's called, there's an AI for that. I've just put the screenshot here, and that enables you to find all the AI platform you need in order to, do the stock market analysis, describe a navigation and other things. So obviously there's been quite a lot of different uses for AI. The one use of generative AI has overshadowed all others is creating content. And by content, we mean information published for consumption. So various form, long, short form articles, social posts, quick blogs, internal documentations, memos, questions for interviews, etc. So any type of content that is meant to be used and, consumed internally or externally. And basically, people are sharing firsthand experience of how AI can affect their daily work. And I'd be really keen to know what you are, whether you are using already AI for your day-to-day or to create content. The question is, are you currently using AI to create content for your organization? And three options: yes, and you're loving it; no, but you're looking into it; or no, and you don't intend to in the future. So I'll give you a couple of, 1 minute to answer. Now let's see if we can see a little bit of results already. Let's see. Oh, it's split. So we have 40% of you that are loving it. 56% of you that are saying no, but they're looking into it, and 4% that do not intend to use it in the future. So it's very interesting. And please share in the chat, if there are other platforms that you've been using and I have not quoted in here, and what you're using them for. So it's always interesting to hear from you. And basically, drafting content in all form has been perhaps the most widely used task of generative AI, and it's perhaps the ones that present most challenges, and that's what we're going to talk about today. As Salesforce pointed out in the AI strategy guide, you should have an important responsibility to ensure that your use of AI is safe, inclusive, and trustworthy. And there's a bit of gap in trust because for most CEOs, AI has become the #1 priorities. But for 73% of employees, they believe that generative AI introduces new risk. So a thoughtful approach to AI accepts such risk because, it's too big for us to perhaps completely ignore it and not use it at all, but it builds effective strategies and policies to help mitigate this risk. So obviously, let's start now with some, ethical concerns. And the first one, around ethical issues is, the use of it. So as an organization, generative AI needs more thorough attention because organizations must adhere to related regulations. Organizations will also navigate legal and reputational challenges, especially if the content turns out to be inaccessible, inaccurate, or harmful. Individuals, on the other hand, are under less scrutiny, but like organizations, they should aim to practice ethical use of AI. So it depends mainly on human oversight, transparency, and an eye for finding errors. So we'll go over, a few of these ethical concerns, and the first one is actually introduced bias. The problem is that AI is capable of processing huge amount of information, more than any human or indeed any collection of humans. But that information is not neutral. And because AI is created by humans who decide on the input, and humans, as we know, are riddled with conscious and unconscious bias, AI systems just learn this bias and they extend that bias through internal machine learning processes. So the issues becomes more concerning in the medium to long term, because if generative AI system produce bias based on the initial human input, that bias is going to be used to create content in the future. So in a sense, generative AI has inherited the conscious or unconscious human bias, and is so, further reproducing it. So there's plenty of examples. Sexism, ageism, racism are particularly prevalent in image generation. I don't know if you can see, but I'll try to describe it very quickly. But basically, Bloomberg did an analysis of more than 5,000 images produced by a generative AI platform called Stable Diffusion. And they just asked that platform to give them specific, profile pictures based on job titles. And basically what it found is that, there was a lot of bias indeed, but more than what is found in the real world. So high paying jobs, for example, were dominated by images of men with lighter skin tone. So here we'll pop the article in the chat or on our, on more of our article. It's very interesting. But essentially, when they asked Stable Diffusion to give them examples of what an architect or a lawyer or a CEO would look like, they were overwhelmingly very light-skinned men. However, being asked a similar question when it comes to dishwasher or fast food worker or janitor, they were overwhelmingly portraying a typical worker as being darker skin. And this is an issue because it's just perpetuating bias and racial bias. And when we are using generative AI to produce content or to produce image, we don't want to contribute to aggravating these bias. And that's particularly worrying because experts suggest that 90% of content could be AI generated in the next few years. But all is not lost, don't worry. The problem obviously needs to be addressed at a regulatory level. We're seeing that EU lawmakers are considering safeguards. There's the EU Artificial Intelligence Act that's being discussed at the moment, and an equivalent executive order in the US. So lawmakers are really finding the right terms to put into policy so that it limits the harmful effect of these bias. But as this is ongoing, there's a few things that we can do. So for instance, we can work with transparent generative AI platform. There's one called Elemental Cognition that carefully curate and reveal the inputs they use, or at least demonstrate a clear commitment to avoiding bias. they explain the reasoning behind the output. They make the decision-making process accessible and comprehensible. So every platform at the moment, ChatGPT or DALI, they exist on a spectrum between opaque, so we have no idea what informs it. This is very transparent and where we have full knowledge. They are hovering between these two extremes. At the moment, many of them are, tend towards the opaque, but there are a few, like the one that I quoted, that are doing everything they can to be as transparent as possible. And there are quite a few, if you have a look at AI, AI for charities or AI for non-profit, there are a few ethical AI platforms out there. You can also create a policy that defines the general rules of AI usage, and that can offer best practice and advice around responsibility, mindfulness, and privacy. Again, here, you basically need to demonstrate that the outcomes and the decisions made by generative AI are effective, they're accurate, and they're not toxic. Obviously, the last one is applying meaningful human oversights to output. So always be skeptical, always be very carefully reading all the outputs, and have a cognizance of potential problems to everything that the platform you're using will generate. Oops. Slide. The second ethical concern is copyright and plagiarism. There's several potential copyright and data issue, and obviously copyright is one of them. There's been already claims. You might have heard of the Anderson versus Stability and AI and all, which saw 3 artists sue multiple generative AI platform, again images, because they suggested that the AI used their work without license to train it. There's other high-profile cases which involve written content. So it's all, very, interesting, and obviously we're waiting to hear the conclusion of these cases. But in the meantime, waiting on court decision. In the meantime, wherever you can, individuals should aim to credit people for their work, even if it does not break any laws, and ultimately AI is not found guilty. Crediting work is still the right thing to do. Failing to credit people may also hit your reputation, because there's plenty of tools that exist and that can find plagiarism. So it's very important to be cognizant of these tools. And I'll go, there's the AI spotting tools, which I'll go over in a minute. But essentially, it's all about checking this AI content for factual inaccuracies, potential plagiarism, editing, never copy and pasting it, and generally, again, having loads of skepticism. So there's a few AI spotting tools that can help you run your own articles through, you can run your articles through them, and they can help you find issues. One is called originality.ai, another one is called writer.com, another one is called GLTR. So we'll also put them in the chat, and hopefully that can be helpful for you that are, looking at creating more content to run that through these tools. The guidelines and policies we have here as well. Our friends at Salesforce have written 5 guidelines, which you can perhaps take some inspiration from. They're accuracy, safety, honesty, empowerment, and sustainability. We'll put the link in the chat so you can have a look in your own time about what they all entail. But I would just focus on the first one, which is accuracy, because essentially the guideline is we need to deliver verifiable results that balance accuracy and precision. We should communicate when there is uncertainty about the veracity of the AI response, and we should enable users to validate these responses. And we'll see in a moment how we can do that. Citing sources, have a reason, be able to explain why the AI gave the response it did. So, look at your prompt. So how were you able to get that answer? It was mainly based at the question you asked ChatGPT, for instance. You could also make sure you highlight areas to definitely double check like the stats, like the dates or recommendations that the AI is generating for you. And basically having an understanding internally of what your standard of accuracy and honesty are will help you then be able to use generating AI more easily. And last but not least, the environmental impact. So The Verge recently produced an interesting fact. If every search on Google used generative AI tools like ChatGPT, because it's the most famous one, it would burn through as much electricity annually as the whole country of Ireland. That is every light bulb, everything that is electrical in Ireland being switched on for a whole year, non-stop. When we are in the midst of climate change crisis and having seeing firsthand loads of negative impact of climate change, it is scary. And then we're seeing also people using AI platform as search engine more increasingly. So a few ways to overcome it. The first one is, obviously the reason why, we're talking about that environmental impact is that the generative AI relies on data, and that data needs to be stored somewhere. And the data centers that are dotted around the world are using a lot of computing power and a lot of energy in order to function. So in order to avoid a problem, one is to track your generative AI footprint. So not all data centers are equally carbon efficient. Some are better than others. If the platform have no indication around footprints, that might not be the best sign, but some other AI platform will have that indication. You can also ask them directly. And the second one is ask yourself the question, do you have to check your query out on ChatGPT? Is that something you can search on Google or even Ecosia instead, a normal search site? It's perfectly acceptable not to use AI at all for that search, for instance. Now we've seen the ethical, how to overcome the challenges of producing ethical content. Let's have a look at accurate generative AI content, because accuracy is very important in a world where there's a lot of disinformation, misinformation, fake news, even deep fake. Some of you may have seen some perfectly plausible videos or that sort of thing, and actually they have just been created with a lot of worldwide events affecting us, our staff, our beneficiaries. It's very important to practice caution. So it puts the onus on us as individuals and organization to remain cognizant of inaccuracy. So, for instance, is about finding reputable sources of content, sites that demonstrate a serious and earnest commitment to truth, or at least the pursuit of truth. We have quite a lot of different articles that our content team has put together over the years that help you find this source of truth and have reliable source of content. And secondly, we should certainly aim to produce factually correct information. And we're going to see shortly that much of the AI generated content is sometimes out of date, inaccurate, and a small portion is actually completely made up. So we're going to have a look at the AI-induced hallucinations and out-of-date information. And the great hallucination, so what is it? Basically, generative AI model often present inaccurate information as though it were correct, often caused by limited information in the system, bias in the data, and issues in the algorithm. So that is called hallucination. And there's been a famous example involving The Guardian. Basically, a researcher, has come across an article that was recommended by ChatGPT, and it said that it'd been written by that journalist. So they reached out to that journalist and they say, "Oh, I can't find any other source of that same article anywhere on the web. But can you confirm you created that article?" And that person, that journalist was like, I don't recall. It looks like something I would write, but I don't think I did. And in fact, it had not been written. ChatGPT hadn't simply made the entire thing up. So that particular example is very fascinating because not only did the initial reader trust the content, and that was perfectly fine, that looked fine, but also the probable author didn't see anything wrong with it because it sounded like, or it looked like something he would write. So hallucinations occur because large language models, which was what makes AI work, they're fed huge amount of information. And this huge amount of information is broken down into smaller units, like letters and words. So they use networks to work out how words and letters work together. They adjust the output, and then over time they just create more and more refined versions of the output. They grasp grammar rule. Obviously, everybody knows we've all used ChatGPT, and the text has been correctly written. Word associations are fine, and they even develop a form of semantic understanding, but they don't understand concepts, so they can put things together and they might not make sense because it's pattern matching. Pattern matching in a sense, and it doesn't have that human oversight to really understand if it makes sense or not. And because AI, and probably most of you using ChatGPT have seen, AI is often very confident. So it's very easy to believe it. So it can harm decision making and cause reputational harm. And we'll see later on in that presentation that it can really cause harm to charities. So the first step is to use transparent AI platforms that can boast diverse and representative training data, and that will minimize the potential for inaccuracy. The second step is to follow up and basically asking the AI platform for more accuracy or more details on output. So ChatGPT will, for instance, verify the claims in the content it produced. So you can, in your prompt, you can just ask it, where do you find that information from? Are you sure? And then finally, apply the golden rule, which is meaningful human oversight. There's some very helpful fact-checking websites. So the Google Fact Check Explorer, Claimbuster, and Snopes, which can also help you, just fact check, and they will run through all what's available on the web to double check if that's correct. And then obviously the other problem is that many AI systems are depending on older inputs. So ChatGPT initially depending on data up to September 2021, meaning that for months people have relied on outputs that ignored all the information published in the past 2 years. That is known as knowledge cutoff date, and anything published after that date would not specifically feature in the outputs. ChatGPT has updated now, but still, there's lots of other platforms that rely on outdated inputs because by the time it takes to feed the most recent, up-to-date information to that sort of platform, it's already out of date. So it's very difficult to have something that's really new and that's really up to date. And also few platforms are able to prioritize the latest and best information. And basically how to avoid a problem, again, check, meaningful human oversight, like, obviously, like I said, ask ChatGPT when or whichever other platform when they were last updated. And then if you are aware of that knowledge cutoff dates, it means that you can effectively use the information provided and then ask the right kind of questions. So instead of perhaps wanting to know the latest results for a specific survey, you might want to rely on information that has, that's much older, because we know that is going to be more accurate. And basically, it's best to use generative AI for how-to content rather than facts and stats, because you can easily apply logic to how to content and ensuring it makes sense, ensuring that the outputs are helpful to your reader. Whereas the facts actually depend on double and triple checking. So it might end up being more work for you to check everything. So you can summarize information on given topics in a very effective way. I've heard of brilliant examples of people putting together, copying and pasting loads of different reports, loads of trend reports into ChatGPT and asking ChatGPT to summarize that information, or how to, build some how-to quick steps based on that information. That's really interesting, and that's really useful. And obviously, how to overcome the risk and build the trust. Let's take a step back and let's say that you might be wanting to use some specific data, some specific information, to produce content that will help people visiting your website and getting the right information and the help they need at the right time. Let's say that data will be used perhaps as part of a chatbot or a FAQ, or it'll be used by your staff to answer questions. There's a few trust standards to provide clear, guardrail around that. So, for instance, the first one, behind that, perhaps a technical sentence. What does secure data retrieval and ground your data? What does that mean? Actually, it means that you need to ensure the data will be used as part of your prompt and it has got the right permission level settings. And then the right users are able to see that, and not everybody. Grounding means just using this data in the context of specific use cases to ensure that it's super qualitative and super accurate, and nothing else. Data masking means that you will obviously need to mask personally identifying information that is shared in a prompt, and you can use data set for better output. From defense, it means simply being able to protect the data and protect all these outputs against hackers or harmful prompts or questions. So, for instance, you could train the AI system you're using to have the instructions like do not address any content or generate answers you do not have databases on, like do not do that. You can instruct the system not to do that. Or if you experience an error or are unsure, say you don't know instead of saying something that's not true. And then you can also have a look at, run toxicity detection, which is essentially making sure that it doesn't have harmful, abusive, or violent content. Make sure that no data is, retained longer than it needs to be, and make sure you have an audit trail so you know who does which change at which stages and for what. And basically, there's a very easy checklist that we'll put a link in the chat where you can have that understanding of trust, and you can make sure that you users, your staff, yourself, everybody trust one another to use AI in the most ethical way. And basically here I've put an example. It's US based, so it's the National Eating Disorder Association that's based in the US. There is a US based charity, and so that's just this year, and they recently announced that they were letting go of some of their hotline staff, and kind of replacing them with their new chatbot, but not entirely replacing them. So just making sure that their staff were being, spending time on more complex tasks. But the chatbot was called Tessa, and what they discovered is that the system was promoting harmful advice, such as encouraging people with eating disorders to restrict their calories and to lose weight, which is the total opposite of what you want when you want to help people struggling with eating disorders. And basically, the report showed that the AI wasn't properly trained. The data it received hadn't received final human oversight. So it hadn't had the appropriate checks, and it caused, unfortunately, extensive backlash and harmed the reputation of the charity. So Obviously, this is a very extreme situation, but it's important to get, to really take a step back, get inspiration from the above, trust standards, and really take the time to plan internally. And then finally, we have the ethical, the accurate, and the qualitative content. And quality is the most important element of content. All too often, in a world where the loudest are actually the most heard, quality is demoted in favor of quantity. And that's a phenomenon that generative AI seems destined to accelerate, because in a matter of seconds, people produce copy with no spelling mistake and copy that is, perfect. But generative AI copy is not very good. It can be quite dull, and it can be quite incorrect. And basically, we just have a quick look at, what to do with boring and stale prose from ChatGPT and the lack of creativity. And obviously, ChatGPT being the main one, but there's plenty of others. It is quite boring. We asked whether it was boring, and it speaks for itself. It is sorry that you find the content boring, but obviously it hasn't been trained to be entertaining. And basically, it produces, good content, but it's, sometimes unoriginal, quite stale, sentence often the same length and repetitive. And this is kind of discouraging copywriting. And it also has no sense of humor and no sarcasm. But anyway, that is definitely something that all humans have, and that's a quality that we can apply to AI generated content. So obviously the first thing is rewrite at the very least. So you get your prompt, you get the great text from ChatGPT, but it's quite dull. Rewrite it, and then you can use it to draft articles, and then add your own your own humor, your own touch, and it can, like I said, it can help you summarize complex information and provide inspiration, but it shouldn't be used to produce complete draft. And it actually is an opportunity for people to write more creatively, be more daring, have a specific tone of voice. So because writers, us as human, we typically champion authoritative writing. So that may shift with the rise of AI, and perhaps some of you might explore more daring ways of writing, and that seems quite a welcome change. So you can also fine-tune your prompt, and ask the platform for more clarity. You can ask it advice about format and structure. You can prompt it to use a simple and concise language. You can ask it to provide some content in the style, in the format of, etc. So there's plenty of other ways you can use AI to create more engaging content, so to boost initial outputs and then to help you get started. And then so obviously if you are able to use that as a way to start writing a draft, that shouldn't be a problem. And basically, obviously, it doesn't present anything new, because, like I said, it's been fed information that essentially already exists. And if you ask ChatGPT to write an article on forensic trends in 2024, it will produce the information, but it will usually rehash pre-existing content. So it has rules that can be bent. Writing has rules that can be bent to make the content more interesting. And this is why content writers would typically use AI in the act of drafting, like I said. And the necessity is really to apply human oversight. So it's almost like, if you have 100 meters to run, it can get you to the first 50 meters, but then you'll have to perform the rest and to add your own take to that. But yeah, so grid writing is unpredictable, obviously, and we enjoy reading because we don't know what's going to happen next. So essentially, it's all about being more creative and daring with the help of AI to create absolutely genius content, and content that people will come back to because they will love what you produce. So obviously, as we've seen, we're wrapping up, a few recommendations which hopefully will make sense in how you're using AI. But it's essentially awareness of the risk, and awareness of the knowledge cut-off date, and awareness of the limitation of AI. How, where you can use it for, to create draft or to summarize things, and where you should restrict its use or have a clear policy on how to do that. Which leads me to my second point, which is, talking internally and have a clear organization-wide strategy on how you're going to use AI to create your content, and continue to achieve your mission, and have that clear policy known to everyone, your stakeholders as well. That's obviously every benefit of being transparent. Continue to apply meaningful oversight and train your team to know what to look for, to know what to double and triple check. And then here we have a few, recommendation. Obviously, there's the AI checklist for charity leaders from Zoe MR Digital. There's Charity Digital, New Philanthropy Capital, and Charity Excellence Framework content that are also very interesting to read. And obviously, everything is free to read in your own time. There's also Learn AI Trailhead from Salesforce, and a few other guidelines that could be very helpful for everybody who just wants to, I guess, everybody's using AI or considering using AI, but it's the next step now. How do we make sure that the content we produce and everything we produce is done ethically, accurately and qualitatively, with the help of AI. And one way also that your team can upskill is all about this 7 main skills. Adaptability and continual learning. It's about what can you do on maybe outside of your working hours to just sign up to a newsletter, watch a couple of videos, and having that openness to change and to be flexible. Data literacy is encouraging skills in data collection or preparation. It can be as simple as knowing how to use Excel or big amount of data, or how to get the right information from your CRM. Understanding data ethics. Domain knowledge is understanding the challenges and pain points of your sector where AI will be applied. Communication and collaboration, ensuring that leaders and team leaders and other senior leaders have the right communication skills to be championing AI internally. Prompt writing is going to be a very, very important and interesting one over the next couple of years, is learning how to write the right prompts to ensure quality AI outputs. We definitely have a session that we had with our friends from Charity Excellence Framework on how to become a ChatGPT ninja. I highly recommend that one. And then, analytical thinking. Remain very critical, very skeptical, and experiment. Don't be afraid to try to iterate and help your colleague to jump on that too. And if you can improve your tech skills in data analytics, in stats reading, and other things, again, there's plenty of resources available that that can be very accessible, because obviously we're very conscious everybody is very busy, has got loads of things to do in order to achieve the mission, but if you or your colleague can perhaps become a champion internally, that can be a good start. Well, hopefully this has been helpful. There's been some tips and platforms you might want to use, or ways you might want to work differently. And I'm looking forward to getting some of your questions and hopefully answering them or sharing them with our content.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. That was so informative. I feel like there was so much content that I'm gonna have to rewatch the recording myself.
Oh, yes.
And we've already had 12 questions come through in the Q&A section, so lots to cover. And I did just want to mention to everyone that as AI is such a popular topic at the moment and there's so much to cover, we do have a space in our feedback form where you can actually suggest things that you would like us to cover in future webinars, which we'd love to read about and hopefully cover in the new year. Without further ado, though, let me jump into the Q&A section, which I'm going to be asking the questions from the most upvoted first. So go and upvote any questions that you would definitely like answered in the next 15 minutes. So the first question is from Jane, who asked, how can you credit people for their work if it's been generated by generative AI?
It is a very good question. I would say to be probably transparent, and perhaps say that the content has been created with the help of a platform, if possible. This isn't actually a question that I will share with our content team, because I think the main principle is remaining transparent. So when you definitely don't know whether that's an image or a text, it's best that you say that you don't know, but you're doing everything you can to find a source, and to credit the source where it's due, if that makes sense. So just showing people that you're actually taking steps to keep things right and to be ethical. I think that's the very important point. Then obviously having transparency to say that some of this has been used with the help of a platform, and that's definitely something we'll share with our head of content and our content colleague to see what their take is on that question. So thank you, Jane.
Definitely, thank you. And the next question is also related, asking how can you ensure that the AI tools you are using are transparent AI platforms?
Very good question as well. I would say that if you look for, first of all, if you look for AI platforms for charities or for non-profit, it already, obviously on Google or Ecosia, whatever you use, it should already give you an idea of what is out there. To be really honest with you, having had a look, having spoken with our content team, there's a spectrum between 0 and 10, let's say, 0 being very opaque and 10 being very transparent. Most of the platforms at the moment are hovering towards the 0, quite opaque. There are some AI foundations, AI for Good, that have lots of information on how to ask of a platform to be transparent, and more importantly, what are the elements that make a platform transparent, i.e., does he explain how it got to that answer? Does he explain which data it's been fed? So also, if we're asking that of the platform we're using, and if we're not happy with the results, then probably it's not very transparent.
Yeah, definitely agreed. And that leads me very nicely onto the next question on how do AI fact-checking websites know that the content they are finding online isn't also AI generated?
Oh gosh, this is
lots of layers
this is
to
a
this
very
one.
good question. This is a very good question. Well, the simple answer is I'm not sure. I would trust the fact-checking websites to do an accurate work. But this is a very fair question. I would say that using the ones that that the content team has recommended. I think they
Hmm.
are using that, often. So we will check with them. But this is definitely a question, a very fair question to ask, because now, if it's searching this same system, it can also find similar results. I think it's also about, how many, say you see a stat that looks a bit odd to you, how many, when you have the result in the fact checking,
Hmm.
when you have the result, how many results do you have? Is it like one or two, or is it several results that indicate the same thing from reputable websites? In which case you're like, okay,
Yeah.
it's highly likely that is the correct information. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, no, I thought that was a great answer. Thank you, Lisa. So the next question is, what are your thoughts on using AI for grant writing?
I think it's quite powerful. It could, because if we're looking at grant writing in, having loads of data about our own organization, and finding a way to take the most relevant impact in order to create a winning bid, because this is what we do and this is why we need your grant. I think the generative AI platform could make a great job at summarizing that data, which obviously I'm hoping is publicly available, so it's
Hmm.
ethical, etc. So I would say it is a good idea to use AI to start writing your bid, to find inspiration,
Yeah,
to
to
maybe
overcome the
find.
writer's block.
Exactly. So I think it's a good. I personally think it's a good way of using generative AI to start drafting a bid.
Great, thank you so much. The next question, as we've still got many coming in, every time we answer one, there's an extra one added.
That's
But
great.
the next
Excellent.
question is, should you make your AI policy public?
I would say so, yes. Especially in the interest of us being a non-profit sector, we want to be very transparent. So I would say I would add a caveat that it's ever evolving, because AI is ever evolving. So your policy
Hmm.
is has will change eventually. But
Yeah.
if you have a framework, and if your board of trustee, your stakeholders, everybody is on board with the policy, understands the policy, then yes, definitely make it public, and be very candid and very open. This is a work in progress, but we want to make sure that we have that policy now, so that when the
Yeah.
time comes to use it more generally, we have already these safeguarding in place to
Hmm.
help us make the best use of it. So yeah, definitely make it public.
I definitely agree with that. Thank you, Lisa. So the next question from Gwen, they asked, I tried to use ChatGPT to write text quoting studies on my subject. It did that, but I didn't recognize the studies and asked for more detail. Turns out it just made them up and it can't scan academic databases. Is there a way I can use AI to point me to real relevant studies? And I know you kind of mentioned this a little bit with the Google Fact Check Explorer and
Yes,
Claim Buster,
yes.
but
I would go with the fact checker tool. Um,
mhm.
if you are relying on accurate data, and it sounds like you want to use stats, I would probably steer away from using ChatGPT for that. Because like you said, it can make things up. So I would rely on more traditional academic databases to find relevant studies, and obviously, Google or
Mhm.
Ecosia to use. Um,
And as a follow-up, Gwen also asked, for fact checking, don't the websites recommended, for instance, Google Fact Checker, also use AI, and how can we know to trust them?
yes, exactly. Well, again, one definitely for our content team. I would say, if you are able to, obviously you have the Google fact checker, probably using the other fact checker tool that we mentioned, maybe just to have comparisons. And then more generally, if you're still very unsure, it might be best not to use it. Well, use the
Hmm.
stats or the data. If you're still very, very unsure or really can't pinpoint, if that stat or if that information is true, I think it's better to abstain from,
Yeah, to go
saying
with the
that in
safe
your content
option.
than do it and then realizing it's wrong, or it's inaccurate. So I think worst case scenario, don't use it. I know it might not be very helpful answer, but if by using all the checker tools, normal human oversight, checking on Google, checking different reputable sources of information, if you still have a doubt, then maybe best not use it and allow yourself
Hmm.
some more time to check.
Yep, that is great. Thank you so much. The next question is from an anonymous attendee who asked, if using AI to generate content for social channels, what are the best ways to get it to mimic the organization's brand, voice, and tone? When I have used ChatGPT, even given examples of my writing for voice and tone, it still has an obviously AI generated tone.
I see. Yeah, completely see what you mean. Um, then, you know, definitely use it to generate content, but just draft. So use it for the first stage of your social media content, I would say. So because if like you said, it's great, but it's not right there, and it probably will not get there unless you train yourself, using more complex prompt. Or I think the easiest, because your tone and voice, is use that as a basis, and then rewrite, rewrite with your tone and voice, with your hashtag, etc. So use it as a way to get ideas, to draft, to have a first draft,
Mhm.
and then rewrite it. So, but hopefully it should still save you some time, and avoid the blank screen syndrome.
Yeah, definitely. I know that we have also tried to upload our Charity Digital House style into our ChatGPT account, which does help with some of the tone and voice issues that you may face with ChatGPT. But at the same time, you must always go over and check it again, because I guess you can never be too sure.
Mm.
The next question, from Gwen, who asked, how can AI be used to clean up raw data from a multi-question survey?
Very good question. We've had that actually. We've come across that. So I think so. If I'm not mistaken, ChatGPT has a paying version, which is a little bit more, which is a little bit faster and more powerful. So you know, obviously the data needs to be clean and ethically acquired, and all private information, personal information, need to be removed. There might be a way that you can use, obviously, sorry, I would only use ChatGPT in that instance, but in the occasion that we have done it, we've used that paying version of it. Otherwise, have you perhaps explored, and I forgot the name now, Power BI? Not sure if that could help, but have a look into the, I think it's $20 per month, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe if you use it just for 1 month, the ChatGPT version could help.
Yep, we actually had a webinar that covered Power BI on Tuesday. So if you can find our on-demand webinar page on the Charity Digital website, you can catch up on Power BI and maybe look into if that's something that can help you. But yeah, I hope those tips help.
Mm.
And I think the last question we have time for today states, we're discussing the social bias created by AI with the example of the bank algorithm shutting down charities' bank accounts. As AI progresses, this may amplify the social bias. How can we address this?
Definitely, it is a big question, and I saw also a couple of answers around racial bias, and I would say let's carefully monitor this, because unfortunately it might still amplify before it gets better. We know of some, again, ethical, charity aimed AI platforms that are looking at using data and remove as much bias as possible. They are still few and far between. So it's very important to check, UK-based, European-based AI platforms that have strong ethics when it comes to being transparent, how they acquire the data, how they make sure it's non-biased. I think ultimately it comes down to having that human oversight, and meaningful human oversight, sorry, that's the term, and really questioning, really being skeptical, is what you are producing, is that factually true? And obviously I've seen loads of unfortunate cases about the algorithm, ruling out, people eligibility for credit, etc., or identifying or flagging people as, as something that they're not. So I think we need to remain very vigilant and cautious, and be very, willing to support any initiative that want to eradicate this bias. Hopefully, after this conversation, we'll pop in the chat, or we'll pop in the resources tab some links to ethical and charity-led AI platform that want to overcome bias.
Great, thank you. And I think you addressed a few of the questions we had all in that one answer. So thank you so much for that, Lisa. And unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us. And thank you for everybody who attended and addressed all of the issues that we've been discussing in the chat and in the Q&A section.
Thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, it's been great. Obviously, as you probably have told, I'm not an expert on AI, but I'm really, really curious about it. And I know the potential, but also the risk. And I think so long as we're all aware of, what it can offer and the limitation of it, we'll be good. And so long as we can train whichever, whatever train means to you, I think we're on a good track. So thank you again.
Great, and just as a last pointer, if everybody could please share their feedback with us, that would be fantastic. I have already pasted the link in the chat, and you'll also receive a prompt just after you leave the Zoom tab. Yeah, giving us feedback really helps us shape our content for future webinars. As I mentioned earlier, there is a slot where you can give us suggestions, so we'd really appreciate that. But if not, thank you again, and we hope to see you next